And you can see that's why and no matter how hard you try, you have only a few places: New York Times, The Guardian, Los Angeles Times. I guess you can name just a few who have actually devotion to fact checking. They have set aside resources to do that. I mean, how many newsrooms you have here that there is actually a section for fact checking? Right. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, that's the huge resources like New York Times, and things like that. So, but the rest of the newsrooms really are struggling with that because there's actually been a decline to devote resources to increase that sort of fact checking and frequency and specialization in that as such. So we do have that issue to um, to actually nurture what you call evidence-based reporting. Okay, he says, she says, but actually evidence-based reporting is what we should be looking for. And I think, and I know you're all looking to that and to learn and all that stuff. Multiple sourcing, for example, right? Not convenience sourcing, but actually multiple sourcing requires time and requires resources. And that's one of the issues which we should be looking at and strengthen our research based on that. And devotion to ethics, to principles of fairness, balance, inclusion. We all have professional codes of ethics in different areas of media. And we need to pay professional vigilance against fake news and against false news and disinformation as such. And I think we should cover fake news as real news so that you can expose how fake that fake news is. Because we need to in front of the public and expose why this is fake news. So don't shy away from spreading, you're not spreading fake news, but you're making it newsworthy enough to actually dissect that in front of the public and show them this is how fake news works. And it empowers you to make judgment calls. And the whole thing falls under the area of what you call MIL, Media and Information Literacy. Okay? If we have to teach the public, in my opinion, the MIL techniques, that is Media and Information Literacy, and that means that know more about how media works. That's basically the fundamental aspect of it. There's an entire area of media literacy that in my classes, but that's educating the media consumers on the process of news making and things like that. So recently there was a wide survey of journalists, and Pew Research Center, UNESCO are really good sources, by the way, of facts about media itself. So these are some of the results that journalists themselves think they do good, they really do a better job, and sometimes they don't do well. One is getting the news and information out to the public. They believe they do a really good job of it, okay? But getting the media accurate information out is not what they do now. They don't do it well as such, in a way, because you can get the news out in public, but they do a poor job of accurately and presenting it in unbiased way is what they don't think they do a good job. And there's increasing concern among journalists of what they call, political interference in the journalistic conduct of what in our course of doing our job. Increasingly, even in EU, European Union, which claims itself the bastion of press freedom and social responsibility. There have been journalists who are expressing concern about interference from politicians and interference from the industry, corporations, mainly because the owners of newspapers, television stations have relationships or ties or business interests with corporations, right? So the news is not only the only business. I think, unfortunately, news barons at one time used to have only newspapers, and that's what they did, right? And but now, if you have, Rupert Murdochs and people different and devoted to certain ideological spectrum, and have business interests outside journalistic enterprise, that tends to really influence how newsrooms operate. And newsrooms are extensions of their ideology. Although journalists try to be and strive to be objective and fair, political interference from the owners also do creep in. And we need to watch out and find solutions to how we resolve issues like that. So, but the good news is this. Job satisfaction among journalists is high, remains high. They take great pride in their work, and I think that's a wonderful thing to do. And public is also realizing that actually there's increasing respect for journalism by the public in free and open societies. Why? Because they're realizing that journalists are really struggling against this onslaught of disinformation. And they're coming out more honorable, they're more praiseworthy, and more respectable as such. And that's good news to the profession of journalism as such. Older journalists worry about freedom of the press in the future. Proliferation actually affects the world. Appreciate and admire your work. Please continue to do what you're doing and keep learning the tools to verify and be accurate and expose falsehoods whenever you can. Thank you very much.
I think before we break for lunch, మీకు అందరికి అర్థమైందా ఇంగ్లీష్లో అలా మాట్లాడింది? అందరికి ఎవరికైనా ఇబ్బంది ఉందా? ఇబ్బంది ఉంటే చెప్పండి. బికాస్ బేసిక్గా ఏంటంటే అలన్నా ఏం చెప్తుందంటే తన అసలు ఐఎఫ్సిఎన్ అంటే ఏంటి, ఇది ఎప్పుడు మొదలైంది, దాని ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ ఏంటి అంటే ట్రాన్స్పరెన్సీ ఒకటి, నాన్ పార్టిజన్షిప్ అంటే జర్నలిస్టులే పక్షపాత ధోరణితో ఉండకూడదు, నిష్పక్షపాతంగా ఉండాలి జర్నలిస్టులు, ఏ పక్షం తీసుకోకూడదు. ఆ సినిమాలో ఇద్దరు సినిమాలో ఒక పాట ఉంటుంది చూడండి, ఎగిరే పక్షులు నా పక్షం అందరూ నా పక్షం అంటాడు. సో మన జర్నలిస్టులది అందరి పక్షం ఉండాలి, ఏ పక్షం తీసుకోవద్దు అన్నది ఆమె వన్ ఆఫ్ ద ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ ఆఫ్ ఐఎఫ్సిఎన్ లాగా ఆమె చెప్పారు. తర్వాత ట్రాన్స్పరెన్సీ అంటే పారదర్శకంగా ఉండాలి. మీరు ఏదైనా ఆర్గనైజేషన్ పెట్టినా దానికి ఫండింగ్ ఎక్కడి నుంచి వస్తుంది, ఇదంతా పారదర్శకంగా ఉండాలి, అదొకటి చెప్పారు. తర్వాత ఈ కోడ్ ఆఫ్ ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ మీకు వాట్సాప్ గ్రూప్లో పెట్టాను నేను, అది చూడండి. తర్వాత తను ఏం చెప్తున్నారంటే ఏ క్లెయిమ్స్ ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెక్ చేయొచ్చు అన్న విషయం కూడా మాట్లాడారు. అంటే దేన్ని ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెక్ చేయొచ్చు, దేన్ని చేయకూడదు, అంటే పని లేని, ఇప్పుడు ఆమె చెప్పారు ఒక ఆయన టటూ వేసుకున్నాడు, అది రొనాల్డో, అది చేయొచ్చా లేదా. సో మనల్ని చాలా మంది అడుగుతుంటారు ఇది ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెక్ చేయండి అని, అది చేయక్కర్లేదు, ఎందుకంటే దానికి ఇంపార్టెన్స్ లేదు, ఈ సమాజం మీద ప్రభావం చూపుతుంది. ఇప్పుడు ప్రొఫెసర్ బబ్లీ గారు చెప్పారు కోవిడ్ వల్ల క్లైమేట్ చేంజ్ ఇలాంటివి ఎక్కువ చేయాల్సి ఉంటుంది, పొలిటికల్ క్లెయిమ్స్ రాజకీయపరమైనవి, ఎందుకంటే ప్రజాస్వామ్య వ్యవస్థలో ఎన్నికలను అత్యంత ఎక్కువగా ప్రభావితం చేస్తున్నాయి ఏవి, ఈ మిస్ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్, మనకు తప్పుడు సమాచారం. కాబట్టి ఎన్నికలను ప్రభావం చేసి అక్కడ డొనాల్డ్ ట్రంప్ అయితే ఇక్కడ కూడా చాలా మంది ఉన్నారు. సో సో ఆ విషయాలు ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెక్ చేయాలని ఆవిడ చెప్పారు. ఏమేమి చేయొచ్చు, నెంబర్స్ ఉంటే ఎక్కువ చేయొచ్చు, ఏదో జనరిక్ క్లెయిమ్స్ అంటే సాధారణంగా ఏదో మన తెలుగు చెప్పాలంటే ఏమో సొల్లు కబుర్లు సో అవి కాదు చేయాల్సింది. కాబట్టి అది ఆవిడ చెప్పారు. థ్యాంక్ యూ అలన్నాది వెరీ. మళ్ళీ మా ఆఫ్టర్నూన్ అంతా ఆమెకే డెడికేట్ చేశాం. సో ఆమె ఇక్కడే ఉంటుంది. తర్వాత ప్రొఫెసర్ సుధాకర్ బబ్లీ గారు తన మ్యాక్రో అంటే లార్జర్ పిక్చర్, పెద్ద వెనకాల ఏమవుతుంది ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకింగ్ ని మన టూల్సే కాదు, వెనకాల ఎకోసిస్టమ్ ఏంటి, ఎందుకు ఇది వస్తుంది, ఎలా ఇది ప్రభావితం చేస్తుంది, దీని వెనకాల ఉన్న కారణాలు ఏంటి, ఇవన్నీ ఆయన వివరించారు. డెమోక్రసీని, ప్రజాస్వామ్య వ్యవస్థని ఎలా అక్కడ అమెరికాలో అయింది భారతదేశంలో కూడా అవుతుంది సార్ ఆల్రెడీ. సో ఇంకా అయ్యే అవకాశం ఉంది. ఆ ప్రమాదం నుంచి మనం కాపాడుకోవాలి. ఈ ప్రజాస్వామ్యాన్ని కాపాడాలి అంటే జర్నలిస్టులుగా ఆయన ఒక మంచి గొప్ప మాట చెప్పారు. ఏమనంటే జర్నలిస్టులకి జీతాలు తక్కువ, అమెరికాలో కూడా తక్కువే, లీస్ట్ పెయిడ్ ఉంటారు, ఇక్కడ కూడా తక్కువే, మనకు కూడా తక్కువే. కానీ ఆయన ఏమన్నారంటే జర్నలిస్టులకి సంతృప్తి ఉంటుంది, నిజంగా అది చాలా సంతృప్తి ఉంటుంది, మనం చాలా సంతోషంగా ఉంటాం. మనకి ఒక సాఫ్ట్వేర్ ఇంజనీర్కి $100, $1000 రావచ్చు జీతం, బట్ ఒక జర్నలిస్ట్కి ఉండే సంతృప్తి, ఎందుకంటే మీకు తెలుసు మీలో చాలా మంది ఇంపాక్ట్ఫుల్ జర్నలిజం చేస్తున్నారు. సో థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్ ఫర్ యువర్ గ్రేట్ థింగ్. ఏమైనా ఉంటే మధ్యాహ్నం కూడా ఇఫ్ అలన్నా చెప్పేది మీకు ఇంగ్లీష్లో అర్థం కాకపోతే వీ కెన్ టాక్ అబౌట్ ఇట్, బట్ ఐ థింక్ మోస్ట్ ఆఫ్ యూ కెన్ అండర్స్టాండ్, ఆల్ ఆఫ్ యూ. థ్యాంక్ యూ. సో వీ బ్రేక్ ఫర్ లంచ్ నౌ. అండ్ ఇప్పుడు తినేసిన తర్వాత అందరూ వెనక్కి రండి, అక్కడ గేట్లు మూసి లంచ్ చేసిన తర్వాత అందరూ వెనక్కి రండి, ఎందుకంటే చాలా ఇంపార్టెంట్. ఆవిడ కష్టపడి చాలా దూరం నుంచి వచ్చారు, చాలా కష్టపడి మనం కూడా వచ్చాము. సో ఇంకొకటి, సారీ ఇఫ్ అలైనా ఇఫ్ యూ కెన్ కమ్ హియర్, మీ క్వశ్చన్ ఆన్సర్స్ అడగండి అమ్మా. అనంత సుధాకర్ బబ్లీ గారు, ఆయన దొరకటమే మనకు అదృష్టం, ఎందుకంటే చాలా గొప్ప ప్రొఫెసర్ ఆయన. మన దగ్గర ప్రొఫెసర్ కావటం ఈజీ, పిహెచ్డి కూడా వానాకాలం చదువులు, కానీ అక్కడ అంటే ఐఎమ్ నాట్ ట్రైంగ్ టు అండర్మైన్ అవర్ ఓన్ గైస్, బట్ సార్ వీళ్ళు క్వశ్చన్స్ అడుగుతారు, అడగండి అమ్మా, తెలుగులో అయినా ఇంగ్లీష్లో అయినా అడగచ్చు, బోత్ ఇప్పుడు చెప్పిన దానికి. బికాజ్ మనకి ఇంకా అక్కడ బిర్యానీ ఉడుకుతుంది. సో బిఫోర్ దట్ telling them the biryani is still cooking because we need to cook it, spices. So questions please. Yes sir.
I just want to share a personal experiences. Nenu 1969 to 1971 first Telangana agitation. So మనం జై తెలంగాణ మేమే మొదలు పెట్టాం. We were the original group who did that. సో ఏమైందంటే నేను అప్పుడు సెకండ్ కాలేజ్ లో BZC చేసిన, దెన్ ఐ కేమ్ ఫర్ జర్నలిజం టు Osmania. సో మనది పక్క, మా డాడీ ఏమో కరీంనగర్, మదర్ ఏమో మెదక్, మాది పక్క తెలంగాణ. సో and I admire Andhra representatives too. I mean, I have best friends who are Andhras too. But so ఏమైందంటే మేము we started walking from Secunderabad College to Osmania ఇక్కడికి. జై తెలంగాణ అనుకుంటా అది అనుకుంటా బస్సులు పోతుంటే రాలేసు. You know, really we were so reckless and so angry. You know, సో ఒకసారి ఒక కేరళ మనిషి కనబడ్డాడు మేము ఇట్లా వచ్చేటప్పుడు. సార్ ఓ యూ ఫ్రమ్ ఆంధ్రం కేరళ అన్నాడు. అంటే నేను యువర్ నెక్స్ట్ అన్నా. పరేషాన్ అయిపోయాడు, అది వీళ్ళు అందరూ మనకున్నది రాబోయే అనుకున్నాను. సో ఎనీవే వీ కేమ్ హియర్ టు ఆర్ట్స్ కాలేజ్. దట్స్ వెన్ వీ హర్డ్ దట్ చార్మినార్ దగ్గర, I mean another student group demonstrating Jai Telangana, there was a police firing. And several students died, okay, on the street. Literally dead bodies. Assembly hall there was another firing. 2 students died. I mean, this is serious business. I mean, it's not just agitation. Not just because we didn't have anything to do. we were fighting for a real cause, for a real reason. So we were very passionate about it. But the thing is, Memo, within all the student groups, the misinformation was incredible. So అక్కడికెళ్ళి అరే 10 మంది చచ్చిపోయారు అసెంబ్లీ హాల్ దగ్గర చార్మినార్ దగ్గర అరే 100 మంది చచ్చిపోయారు అరే I mean, we were imagining the scale of police firings and the deaths. And we were getting more angry and more frustrated. Memantram, we all got arrested. Okay, there are the మన Shati Studios there, ఒక makeshift jail పెట్టిండ్రు. సో మా అందరినీ అందులో జైలు వేసారు. మంచిగా పప్పు అన్నం వండిర్రు, మేము మంచిగా తిని గొడవ దుంకి వెళ్ళిపోయాం. So that was our history of how we wanted to express our frustration with the state of affairs. That misinformation really, really affected us. We made some bad judgments, and we had really, I wasn't particularly responsible for it, but I've seen my friends burning buses, RTC buses. I mean, it all affected our own lifestyle at time. But we didn't really, were not that thoughtful. In the country, we were that angry about all this misinformation coming, and how we were being mistreated in Andhra, and how all kinds of how exploitation was taking place. And a lot of it was half truth, misinformation, very classically based on truth but exaggerated claims. And we didn't have the power to reason, and we didn't know how to do that. Just experience with experiencing how misinformation and propaganda can affect quality of life. And I wanted to share that, by the way. Yeah.
The trainer wants to ask.
Hi, Ravana. I just wanted to ask you whether IFCN is going further and encouraging people with local languages for becoming signatories, and we have been doing several fact checks in local languages in India. So are you going to certify them also?
Yes. The idea is there's no restriction based on languages. The issue that we come to is that sometimes the process is a little bit slower because of the assessment. So to find, when you're publishing fact checks in certain languages, it can sometimes be a bit challenging because we need to find an assessor who speaks that language. And so that's kind of where the delay comes in.
And so sorry to interrupt, but how do you select the assessor? Because it's a foreign language for you, and how do you select those assessors for the native languages?
Now, I will, in the interest of transparency, this is mostly Ferdy's doing, but a lot of times we work with people, will do a training of the trainers, essentially. And so working with them, with someone who speaks that language, on what the assessment process is. And so right now we're actually doing it even for European countries. Like, we have a Hungarian organization that applies to be a signatory. They speak Hungarian in Hungary. That's it. So, right now we're looking to find that assessor. Ideally, we would look at, a great resource is signatories that already exist. So, for example, if there's already assessors in this, or if there's already signatories in this state that speak the language, having them would be super beneficial. So that's kind of how we are looking to gain our assessor pool. But we definitely need to grow the assessor pool. Applications that have been in the pipeline for months, and we just still have not found an assessor for them, oftentimes because of language barriers. But we're working through it. It's something that I know Facebook, Meta, it's very important to them to get different languages. So they're helping fund it as well to increase our assessor pool. It's a very long answer for a very short question, but.
Thank you so much.
Next, Mega. Here, you want to ask? Go.
Sudhakar sir, I'm Harita from V6 News. And yes sir. And అమెరికాలో మీడియా ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ ఎలా ఉంటాయి, మన దగ్గర అంటే పొలిటికల్ ఇన్ఫ్లుయెన్సెస్ ఉంటాయి, అక్కడ మన బౌండరీస్ ఉంటాయి, ఎలా పనిచేస్తాయి?
Okay. Primary journalism organizations are essentially non-political. Okay, there is like Society of Professional Journalists, for example, and then there is National Association of Broadcasters, and there are certain groups which are mainline journalistic organizations. Are they don't allow politics to come in, you know. So they're journalists first, and they treat themselves as such. Private life, they can be either liberal or conservative, Democrat, Republican, or independent. That doesn't permeate into the journalistic organizations. There are some organizations which are specifically identified as such, the LGBTQ associations, which are, you know, press related, and then Hispanic, Spanish-speaking journalism, Black Journalists Association, Native American Indian journalists. Now they will take stands on certain social issues more often and more frequently and more vigorously. I don't think they're called explicitly political. They're not, you know, into that sort of thing. But they're activists. They're more activism in these organizations and more social cause oriented, passionate journalism practice. So, in that sense, mainline or non-political.
Hello sir, this is Radhika from 10TV sir. యాక్చువల్గా మీరు ఇందాక 69 ఇన్సిడెంట్స్ కొని చెప్తున్నప్పుడు డిస్ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ అప్పుడు ఉంది, ఇప్పుడు ఉంది. అప్పుడైతే కొంత సోషల్ మీడియా అదంతా తక్కువ ఉంది కాబట్టి స్ప్రెడ్ అనేది తక్కువగా ఉంది.
కరెక్ట్.
సో ఇప్పుడు అనేది చాలా విపరీతమైన స్ప్రెడ్ జరుగుతుంది. సో దాన్ని కంట్రోల్ చేయడానికి యుఎస్ లో ఎట్లాంటి ఫార్ములాస్ తీసుకుంటారు, ఎట్లా కట్టడి చేస్తారు?
Do you want to answer that? How social media can be tamed in terms of spreading false information.
Amplification. She's asking during the misinformation was there, disinformation was there during 60s also, but now social media is amplifying it. So how can we control it, or how is US doing it? What are they doing it? What are the things happening there? That's what.
For the record, it's an effort. It's not perfect yet. One of the things is, again, the third-party fact-checking network on Facebook. So partnering with social media to try and, when this stuff is posted, having it be debunked. I think the big thing that a lot of organizations are trying to emphasize now is not just fact-checking, but media literacy components. Because part of the problem is the fact-checking is great, but if you don't have a population that understands how to consume media, the fact checks aren't getting to them. And so a lot of programs that are starting right now are doing both fact checking and media literacy in tandem. And I think that's kind of the next step. In a perfect world, we would be teaching media literacy to students. I think right now, starting it to teach it to adults is too late. I think you need to start in primary school, frankly. And I think those are some efforts that are growing, not quick enough. And there are people that want to regulate some of these social media platforms. And it's a big debate in the United States about whether Facebook, for example, does Facebook constitute a publisher? Are they a news source? And they say that they're not. And right now, they're not. But they kind of are, right? Even though they're not blatantly, I mean, they publish news material regularly, and based on your algorithm, like I get specific news stories that are put on my Facebook based on stuff that I've already read. And so I think that's the other big thing, is learning how working with these Facebook, Twitter, these social media companies to adjust their algorithms. Because right now, you guys are all familiar with what a social media algorithm is? It's the computer programming that elevates stuff on your social media. And right now, most of the algorithms are programmed to respond to outrage, strong emotions, to mis and disinformation. And so part of what people want to work with social media platforms is to adjust the algorithms so that fake news isn't rising above. Facebook emphasizes reactions, right? The little like buttons or the angry emoji or the laughing emoji. And a lot of junk is what gets those reactions. And so working to adjust the algorithm and media literacy, I think, are two of the other main components that fact checkers and policy advocates are working towards.
So our area actually in American politics is very, sanctimonious. I mean, it's all sacred. You don't touch the word censorship or regulation. But in the Congress, Facebook opponents చాలా మంది ఉన్నారు, because they have faced personal attacks and they paid a price with their political careers. So I'm sure my worry for India is the malinformation on religious conflicts, extremists in every religion, and minority religions will be severely damaged if that kind of disinformation, malinformation goes unchecked. So I don't know the solution to that other than media literacy. I think people should learn more about how media and information work in a society like ours, and take precautions. And Memo, we've been teaching for the last 25, 30 years in American universities on critical thinking skills. Think critically through issues. Don't accept anything as a fact. You have to intuitively judge and see, is this right? Is this wrong? Is it evoking certain emotions in you that are bad and angry? And so those are all really cues. Intuitively, we as human beings can do a better job consuming the material, not just coming from the other side as journalists. Public, how do we is ahead? So there's no clear answer to that, but hopefully we'll begin to get wise.
Question from student Megha.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is to you. I create videos, and I was very intrigued when you mentioned that videos for fact checks are on rise and required. So I just thought if you could throw some more light on that, and how we can make the video more effective, and which can reach the population. Apart from the algorithm, like how can we pack a fact check in a short span?
I will talk about that more tomorrow. I have a whole section on it. But part of it is hitting people where they're at. So for you guys, videos that can become reels on Facebook, because the algorithm populates that. In the United States, we use TikTok a lot because that's where the next generation is. Keeping it short, maybe keeping it humorous. Humor performs well. We have something called, and I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, called the Teen Fact Checking Network. And so one of the ways that we utilize the Teen Fact Checking Network is it's fact checks for topics that hit teenagers, and the fact checks are done by teenagers. Right? Because teens don't want to be pandered to. They don't want adults to tell them what to think. And so making sure your demographics are right, and catering it to that specific audience. So knowing, it's tough, right? Because it's culturally different and it's different, but knowing what is going to perform best for a certain demographic. And a lot of it is, again, hitting the right platforms: TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram for young people, Facebook for older people. Twitter's weird. Twitter, like, it's super popular in some countries. It's not popular in others. Sometimes I feel like it's just a ton of journalists talking to each other on Twitter. So hitting the right algorithms and keeping it short. So being able to deliver it concise and then hyperlinking to something else. So if somebody wants to read more information about it, but video attention spans are way shorter than textual attention spans. So you really don't want to keep a video more than like 90 seconds. And analyzing your data, right? Seeing how long people are staying on that video. And YouTube's great for that. YouTube tells you when people stop watching. So I think it gives it to you in 15 or 30-second intervals. So getting a gauge of how long your audience is watching is super important. But again, catering to the algorithm, Facebook loves their reels. I'm sure you guys are all getting reels promoted on your Facebook right now.
They're a big thing now, reels.
They're a big thing. And a lot of like TikToks you'll see on Facebook and Instagram. That's the big joke, is that's how 30-year-olds watch TikTok, is they just wait for it to show up on Instagram. That's how I do it. So those are broadly kind of ways to hit it. And I'll talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. I actually have some videos from the audience engagement editor at Pointer, and that is her bread and butter. She loves reaching out to people on social media. And stories. Stories are good because people just flip through them.
We have Rihanna from
రెహానా ఫ్రమ్ ఎన్టీవీ. ఇప్పుడు మనం ఇండియాలో మాట్లాడుకున్నట్టయితే ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకింగ్ యూనిట్స్ ఆర్ సెక్షన్స్ ఇన్ ద మీడియా హౌసెస్ కంపారిటివ్లీ నేషనల్ మీడియా రీజనల్ మీడియాలో దాదాపుగా లేదు. ఇందాక మీరు క్వశ్చన్ కూడా అడిగారు. సో మై క్వశ్చన్ ఈజ్, అమెరికాలో ఉన్న మీడియా హౌసెస్లో ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకింగ్ సెక్షన్స్ ఉన్నాయా, ఇస్ ఎస్టాబ్లిష్డ్, అండ్ పబ్లిక్లో అవేర్నెస్ ఎలా ఉంది మిస్ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ గురించి?
Public awareness is not that high in the United States. And that's where I think the solution of media literacy should be emphasized. There's certain prestigious and well-financed media organizations like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, LA Times, and other organizations which have fact-checking units in the newsrooms, and their main task, main job is to check the facts before they are published. And they're also beginning to take fake news and dismantle it by presenting the real facts behind that fake news. So, but unfortunately, మన human nature ఎట్లా, bad news travels faster than good news. Kada? So that's what happens when fake news travels fast and fact checking takes time. And by the time we present the real news, people just forget about that aspect of it. So that's the real challenge. And hopefully every newsroom represented here will have some hope. You'll focus on fact checking resources within the newsrooms you're presenting.
Okay, Corina, you want to speak about how many signatories are there in United States?
Oh my goodness. In the United States, I think we have 30 something.
30.
Something, yeah. So as he said, there's some mainstream publications. USA Today is a signatory. Washington Post, they have a fact-checking arm. They're a signatory. PolitiFact, they are a signatory. Yeah, so we have some outlets. 16 in India. You guys are number 2. But yeah.
My question is to Ravana. Now I understand that India has the highest number of IFCN signatories outside the United States. I do understand the process that IFCN works with pointers and the social, social giants like Meta and Google. So what happens is Google picks up an IFCN signatory in India, and they choose participants to be their members or mentees to be part of a fact-checking organization. Or is IFCN contemplating to work with organizations in different countries including India, so that people like them who are being trained, like they had a robust 6 months experience, just because they are not part of an IFCN signatory company, they are losing out on opportunities to get trained by international experts.
So does IFCN think of something like this where they can directly get in touch with whoever's eligible and who is capable for the training? Or, does it require them to be associated with an IFCN signatory?
No, and actually so I've been at IFCN now since the end of 2020, and one of my goals has been to expand our international training arm. So we've been going after a lot of, for example, US State Department funds to reach out to different organizations. We've been utilizing money that we've gotten from the Google News Initiative to train other outlets. The program I worked with last year was with the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and that's where we trained across 20 countries in 17 languages, and almost none of the organizations we trained were IFCN signatories. That was in fact part of the training was, if you're interested in becoming a signatory, we talked to them about the process, but we also talked to news outlets in specific countries. No, we do not want to limit ourselves just to working with IFCN signatories. Certainly there would be opportunities available only to IFCN signatories, but certainly one of my goals for Pointer and for IFCN as a whole has been to reach people beyond just the signatory community. And there's some places, we work with an organization from Iran, and we've done a lot of training with them. They're not an IFCN signatory because they can't be. They just can't fulfill all the principles of transparency because of their own safety concerns. But we've done training with them for several years. And so, yeah, the short answer is yes, IFCN and Pointer as a whole are steadily growing to work with non-signatory organizations because fact checking is important on its own, not just being an IFCN signatory. Being a fact checker is important. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm sorry, I have to leave for another meeting, so I won't be here for lunch.
Sir, మీకు ఒక క్వశ్చన్ సార్.
Okay.
సుధాకర్ గారు.
Let me leave my cards here. And it 823
990
823
823
3579. Configuration 3, 3, and 4 numbers 990 823 3579. And I'll be available till August 15th. After that, in the States, you have my email and WhatsApp number. If you can send me an invite, I'll respond back to you.
Sir,
Yeah.
one question on behalf of all. You please ask, Uma, please.
Nadi, I have my iPhone, but I have my iPhone, but because of the connection, Wi-Fi connection is not going through. So I said, let me go for high tech, So that is the advanced version actually, and I just don't know how to turn it on.
She's asking you, is CA spying on you? Sir, one question on behalf of all of them, because they want some of them students and journalists also who are in the mid-career. If they want to come and pursue their masters in the United States, what would you advise?
Get in touch with me. That's the best advice. I have so many of them I have directed and advised to. Unselfishly, I can go beyond the call of duty to help you. Okay, just get in touch with me. Yeah, absolutely.
My question, sir. Sir, Rupa. Sir, misinformation spread కాకుండా మీడియా హౌసెస్లో సెక్షన్స్ ఉన్నాయి అండ్ మిస్ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ని డీబంక్ చేయడానికి టీమ్స్ ఉన్నాయి. ఇదంతా దీంతో పాటుగా గవర్నమెంట్ నుంచి మీడియా హౌసెస్ పైన ఒకవేళ మిస్ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ కనుక న్యూస్ రూపంలో కనుక బయటకు వస్తే లీగల్ యాక్షన్స్ తీసుకునే ఫెసిలిటీస్ ఏమైనా ఉన్నాయా అక్కడ?
Not unless it deals with national security, terrorism, espionage. United States government does not get involved in First Amendment issues. First Amendment is the most sacred
Yes.
in the constitutional amendments. And once, and that guarantees literally freedom of speech,
Yes.
freedom of press, freedom of religion. And so all these fundamental rights are embedded in the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So all politicians stay away from any regulation or interference with any semblance of press. You can call yourself a press, you may not represent any particular media organization, but you still have that press freedom guaranteed under the First Amendment.
Yes.
So government does not interfere.
There's no registration.
Yeah.
Else would register with anybody.
Yeah.
Government funds under India, the farming
He is a source of. Babu, correct అడిగమ్మా ఏంటిది ఈ question?
Oh, I don't know.
ఆయనకు తెలియదులేండి.
Yeah. I'm not an expert in that.
ఎన్ఆర్ఐలు ఇండియా లెక్కమని తెలంగాణ అంటే పాలిటిక్స్ ని మోడిఫై ఏమంటారు
Fund చేస్తున్నారా? Our contributions. Well, Indian Americans have some of the most influential group in America. ఎందుకంటే they do collect a lot of contributions. And every presidential candidate speaks to Tana or Ata as main speakers. ఎందుకంటే they collect a bag full of money and leave. So మనోళ్ళు చాలా చాలు. I mean, we know how to fund, who to fund, when to fund. ఇదంతా, that orchestration is there. Just like probably.
Want to ask one last question? To whom? Question, sir. Last
Hannah.
question.
So my question is that does fact checking always needs delay or time? Can it not be done quickly enough
Like,
so that it can be published? Maybe a little delay, not immediately, but can it be published immediately? And also, are organizations really looking forward to have a fact check team? Because why do they need it? Because they get enough publicity.
So your first question, it is possible to fact check quickly. In the United States, we have a really big speech that the president has every January or February called the State of the Union. It's about an hour long. And PolitiFact, our colleagues at PolitiFact, they fact check that speech in real time. But it's a huge undertaking and it requires a lot of staffers to be able to individually fact check each statement. And that's kind of why it's important to have that repository of fact checks so that you have something to quickly reference. Because a lot of politicians, as I'm sure everyone knows, will repeat the same claims over and over again. So it is possible to do fact checks in real time. It's just a little bit more challenging and requires a lot of staff. And unfortunately, if there's one thing a lot of journalism organizations don't have right now, it's a lot of people working there. So it's possible, it's hard, and so most organizations will only do it for pretty exceptional occasions. In the United States, we'll do it for the State of the Union. We'll also do it for debates between our presidential candidates. That's a very common time to do live fact checks. But I think a lot of fact checkers don't want to run the risk for your normal fact checks of sacrificing speed for accuracy, which is a problem that happens quite a bit in journalism. Your second question, which was about our outlets trying to pursue fact-checking departments. And I think a lot of them are because I think fact-checking plays really well online, especially when you have things like those rating scales, right? The Pants on Fire or the Washington Post does something called the Pinocchio scale. Is Pinocchio like a pot? Yes. And so it's the length of his nose of how true a statement is. That stuff performs really well on social media, which is clicks. And clicks are, unfortunately, we live and die by the clicks on our newspaper articles. So I think a lot of outlets are keen to have fact-checking departments because of how well it performs and that it really appeals to the current attention span of people, which is not to read an entire news article. It's reading a shorter story. That's not to say your fact check should just be one sentence. You should have a story associated with your fact check, but it's a little bit more digestible than a long form piece. Even though I personally, for the record, I love my long form journalism, but I know not everybody else does. And so I think it's just another type of journalism to add to your repertoire, along with investigative journalism, your breaking news stuff. It's all just, you're creating a balanced meal for yourself, so to speak.
Thank you, ma'am.
తెలుగులో అడుగు.
ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకర్స్ సేఫ్టీ మెజర్స్ ఎలా తీసుకుంటున్నారు ఫ్యాక్ట్ చెకర్స్ సేఫ్టీ
Yes, they are harassed a lot. I keep an entire, so as part of the like the Facebook third-party fact-checking network, for example, the IFCN shows up, and I literally keep an entire inbox of people that send us hate emails. I call it haters. They are harassed. I'm not sure they're harassed anymore. Journalists. It seems like this is just we're not the most popular people in the world right now. But they are certainly harassed. Particularly, a lot of political figures will get angry at fact checkers. IFCN right now, we have a harassment working group that we've been working with journalists to deal with harassment that they face. As I mentioned, we also have a legal support fund because sometimes the harassment can work its way with political repercussions. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the media outlet Rappler, which is based in the Philippines. And Rappler feuded very publicly with the former President Rodrigo Duterte to the point that he imposed criminal penalties against them for libel. They were not committing libel, but he charged them for it. And so we have a legal support organization we're developing to help support journalists where the harassment veers into political repression. But that's not the nicest answer. I wish I could say they weren't harassed, but they are, as most journalists are, unfortunately.
So I have a question. Is IFCN giving a signatory status to the video-only platforms like YouTube channels or TV channels? They're not digital or print. They're only video-only platforms like YouTube's.
Yeah, we don't have any restrictions based on platform. So as long as you fulfill all of the code of principles, then you're eligible to be a signatory. I think generally the implication is that most media outlets would have at least a website that publishes, because you want that contact information. That's important, is the organizational structure. But in terms of the way you deliver your fact checks, it doesn't have to be any certain type of medium. It can be digital, it can be print, it can be television, as long as you fulfill all of the required principles. We don't have a ton of TV outlets, but I think it's something that we are keen to get more of, because that is a main way people get news.
Okay. Then I have a similar question that may not be directly related to disinformation or misinformation. What we see, there's a lot of two aspects. One is revenue aspect. Other one is algorithms, what you spoke just now. What's happening in Telugu digital platforms, not about TV or printer. In most of the digital platforms, people are not, they're going for sleazy content, like passion crimes, sexual jealousy murders. So, because what happens, Google algorithm is showing up it on the top. You get more clicks. So is it not these agencies trying to, that algorithm, whatever, is trying to promote such kind of content, and in some cases disinformation also, because of their algorithm? Is it not discouraging genuine journalism? Somebody writing a nice explainer, it will not show up in a search result, though they do a lot of SEO, search engine optimization, even on YouTube and Facebook. So at least Facebook has some community guidelines, and also Google, they do have, but that's one aspect. How is IFCN engaged with changing algorithms or system related, their inbuilt system related, either for disinformation or for this kind of deterioration of journalism standards? One thing. Another one is revenue. What Google gets and what Google or YouTube gives YouTuber is a pittance.
Yeah.
So for instance, we have a lot of one or two YouTubers, and a lot of YouTubers I've seen sitting in Urdu journalism conference, but what they get is a few dollars,
Yes.
which is not even sufficient, and encouraging them to do some kind of tactics, whether they call blackmailing tactics or selling their content or whatever. So why, like, in that sense, now people are depending more on these YouTube or social media, whatever platforms, and the genuine print journalism sites, or which are genuine in the sense, quotes, credibility or whatever. So the revenue they give is pittance. They get most, despite what people see like GNI funding or Meta fund is seen as, in Telugu we call Papa Nivarana. You do a lot of sins, so for removing that you go and offer to the god. So they're doing more damage. What they're doing, like you have seen a lot of people bombarded YouTube on that day. So I think that is how is IFCN looking at that aspect of, but you don't venture into that area of telling them, look, what you're doing in revenue sharing is bad, or what you're doing on deterioration of journalism standards is bad.
I mean, we've worked with them on standards. We haven't worked with them on revenue stuff at all. I'm not sure they would listen to us, frankly. We definitely have to develop standards. As you saw with YouTube, that's something that's a new ambition of working with YouTube to develop standards and to change the algorithm. It is a process, and unfortunately, those companies are also enormous. And so, you know, a lot of the people that we work with don't have as much sway in the programming side. But the fact that they're willing to have a conversation with us, at least as a start, I mean, we're further along, I think, with the revenue stuff. No, I mean, we haven't. I think that's something that is probably worth a discussion. Maybe at the next Global Fact.
Unless you get funding.
Yeah.
Unless you get funding, you're not surviving. Some genuine journalists who start their website, no funding, they're drowned. Funding is not possible for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's a big area where I think these social media giants have destroyed good journalism.
Yeah, and Facebook has already announced that they're reducing their amount of money that they're investing in journalism. Well, yes, they announced that recently in the amount that they're paying journalists to have their stuff circulated on the platforms. It's tough because, right, like it's not just like all of journalism is struggling with its funding right now. And so I'm not sure there's one answer, or I'm not sure that IFCN is equipped to figure out the funding problems with journalism as a whole, because the industry is struggling right now. And I think part of the problem is when reputable journalists put paywalls up, right, then people just go to crummy news sources. And so it's a struggle to try and balance out revenue streams. And I think the industry as a whole, not just fact checkers, but the journalism industry as a whole is struggling to kind of figure out where that funding comes from. I know in the United States, one thing that's growing is the nonprofit model. So news outlets are becoming 501c3 nonprofits, which is a tax status in the United States. And in order to support their journalism, they're receiving grants and donations as opposed to relying on advertising or tech money. That's not a sustainable thing for certainly an individual YouTuber, but for smaller media outlets, that is definitely an approach. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you very much, all of you. Just clap for Alena. Even if biryani is not cooked, we go and eat. I'm hungry.